Based on just how it started out, you would not expect it would have gone into becoming what it eventually did become. What's up, everybody? So, for this edition of my old school reviews, I'm going to go through the Rambo franchise because it was just such a main staple growing up. And actually, I didn't really see the first one until way later. I was like maybe 12, 13 years old. I had seen two and three just over and over again. But then I saw that there was a first one. And when I checked it out, it was very, very different from what I thought it was going to be based on watching two and three for so many times. And I think it's probably the best one, really, and very, very underrated. So with this particular movie, it's kind of like I put it in the same category as John Wick because it changed movies like forever. Before Rambo First Blood came around, there really wasn't an action movie genre. There were movies with action in it, but it really wasn't like its own thing. And Stallone just really, when he kind of figured this out, he was like, well, this is an untapped market. Let me get into it, and this could be my thing. And what an amazing decision that was. And for those of you who have not seen it, it's a pretty simple story, and they kind of took the best pieces of it and then just made entire movies out of it. But it's way more of what others, more snooty people, might consider a film, not a movie. Now, it basically follows the character of John Rambo as he is trying to reunite with an old uh, Vietnam veteran, an old war buddy. They all served in the same unit, Special Forces, Green Berets. And so now that he's back, for a while now, he's like, hey, let me go check in on him and see how it is, see how he's doing. And finds out that his friend passed away as he is walking through town just to kind of, figure out what his next move is, because I don't think he actually made any plans up until then. Gets into a very tense exchange with the local sheriff. Local sheriff is not a nice guy, doesn't want him around, drives him to the border of the town, and instead of just leaving and ending the movie right then and there, Rambo walks back into town, and that begins the whole shenanigans, where it's basically him versus the entire town, including National Guard and cops and all of that jazz. Now, there are some really, really great action sequences in here. There's that great truck chase where Rambo is driving, that big military truck and just kind of slams into the cop cars. There's, of course, the great sequence in the forest as he's trying to escape and evade the policeman from getting him. There's the tunnel sequence that is, really, really tense. And then of course in the end, as he kind of makes his way back into the town, how he's just shooting up, with the lights of the different stores and whatnot, and big explosions. It really made me miss practical effects. So it's got some great, great things in here. Two things stick out to me that are really, really great. One, there's not a lot of Rambo in this movie. I think one of the best things that it does is really, parry down the amount of dialogue that he has and lets other people talk about him. So you spend a lot of time with the cops and like with their frustration and their anxiety and their fear of trying to get this guy and why is it so hard. And then when Rambo's old superior officer, played by Richard Crenna, shows up and starts talking about, hey, I built this guy, I created him, and, he's one of the best soldiers that has ever been, in existence and whatnot. So they're talking him up. It reminded me a lot of, at the beginning of The Silence of the Lambs, of how much Hannibal Lecter is talked about before you actually see him. And so before you see a lot of what he does, you see a lot because he, when he's in custody at the beginning with the cops, and he's fighting back. And I love how it really builds up his conflict with the cops. Because first it's just kind of like, oh, no, I'm not going to do what you say. I'm going to walk back into town. And then when they take him back to the station, they're trying to fingerprint him. He's, resisting a lot with his hand and not letting them, fingerprint him. And, even with taking the shower that they give him, like they're basically just hosing him down with a fire hose, and they try and dry shave him with a razor blade, and, they're putting that club on him, on his throat until he finally kind of like relaxes a little bit. But when, they're fully mobilized and, Richard Crenna pops up, and then you see him really kind of do what he does and, be resourceful as he is in the forest. Then you're like, man, who is this guy? You're really intrigued yourself. Richard Crenna's character, Colonel Trotman, really builds up that intrigue, and kind of mystery to him. So as the story unfolds, you're like, oh, okay, so how is he going to live up to what, Colonel Trotman talked about before? And then another thing that I think is just tragic, poetic, and like beautifully sad is the ending monologue. This movie doesn't end with like a big boss fight with big explosions, with a big action set piece. It ends with Rambo just breaking down, like emotionally. And usually, in action movies, it's like, the big final boss fight. So it's a release when you see that, it's like that cathartic release when the hero finally prevails over the big baddie. But this time it's more of like a cathartic release of emotions that has been built up inside Rambo for God knows how long, since he's been back from the war. And I remember it being difficult to understand because, I'm just a kid. So I didn't really know much about the Vietnam War. And now seeing it again, revisiting it as an adult, even though I'd seen it a bunch of times, it's been years since I've watched it. But watching it again, it's really heartfelt and probably one of the best moments of acting in Stallone's career, And it's so worth a watch. I love how restrained it is. It's only 93 minutes, including credits. So it's very contained, And actually, fun fact, the original cut of it was 3 hours long. And Stallone was like, just cut all of my dialogue. Get rid of all of it. Let other people talk about him. And then keep the best bits, of Rambo's dialogue. Incredible movie. Go back and watch it. And just appreciate it for what it was at the time. You can really say it's like the birth of the action movie genre. Anyways, what about you guys? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Smash that like button, give me a follow, and I'll see you guys next time.